Most men think fear comes from the gun, but that isn't where mine began, and it took me most of my life to understand that. My name is Samuel Carter, and I am 82 years old. I learned too late that the thing I was running from followed me farther than any man ever could. I was born owned, and that word still sits wrong in my mouth even now. I came into the world in eastern Arkansas in the spring of 1816, on a cotton place that stretched farther than a boy's eyes could measure. I did not know my birthday for many years, only that the ground was warm and the air smelled like wet leaves when my mother told me I had arrived. She called me Sammy, and the white folks called me Boy. The ledger had another name for me, one that never felt like it belonged to a breathing person, just ink pressed into paper. From the time I could stand, I understood the rules without anyone explaining them. You worked when told, you kept your eyes low, you did not ask why, and you learned the sound of a man's boots before you learned the sound of birds. My father was sold when I was small, so small that his face blurred in my memory like a figure seen through fog. I remember his hands more than anything, wide and careful, showing me how to hold a hoe so it did not tear my palms. When he was taken, my mother did not cry in front of me. She went quiet instead, which was worse. Quiet had weight to it. Quiet meant something had been broken, that would not be fixed. I grew up with that quiet sitting in my chest, a tight place that never softened. By the time I was 10, I was working full days. By 12, I was strong enough that men noticed. That is when trouble tends to find a boy like that. I learned early how anger looks on a man's face when he knows he can do anything he wants and never answer for it. I learned how to make myself smaller, how to disappear into work, how to take pain without sound. I did not know then that all of that would harden into something else later on the night. I ran was not planned the way stories make it sound. There was no speech, no long look back at the fields under moonlight. It was just a moment when something inside me finally said no, and that was all. I was 16, maybe 17. A new overseer had come in, a man with pale eyes and a habit of smiling while he hurt people. That night he came to our cabin drunk, looking for someone to blame for a day that had not gone his way. When he reached for my mother, something in me broke loose. I struck him with a piece of firewood and ran before I understood what I had done. I did not stop running until my lungs burned and my legs shook, and even then I crawled into the brush and stayed there until morning, afraid to breathe too loud. I followed rivers west because they were harder to get lost from. I stole food when I could, begged when I had to, and slept with my back against trees so no one could come up behind me without making noise. Hunger teaches patience, fear teaches speed. I learned both. By the time I crossed into Indian territory, I was thin as wire and older than my years. I met people who did not ask many questions, and I learned not to offer answers. Names were flexible things out there. I stopped being Sammy. I became Sam. Later I became Carter, after a man who taught me how to set traps and never cared to know where I came from. It was on the western edge of that territory that I first touched a gun. A trader had one laid across his knees and I could not stop looking at it. It was not the power of it that drew me, not at first. It was the balance, the way it rested in the hand, like it belonged there. The trader noticed my interest and laughed. He let me hold it, showed me how to check it, how to treat it with respect. He said a careless man with a gun was already dead. He just did not know it yet. I carried that sentence with me. I carried many things with me that I did not realize were shaping who I would become. I worked for wages for the first time when I was 18. Actual money placed into my palm, earned and kept. It felt unreal, like holding something borrowed. I hired on driving cattle, guarding freight, anything that put distance between me and the past. The West was not gentle, but it was honest in a way I understood. Danger was usually visible. You could see it coming, most times, and if you were quick and steady, you could survive it. I found I was both dots. I did not start fights. That is something people like to get wrong about men like me. I avoided trouble when I could, but trouble has a way of finding the man who looks like he can handle it. I was tall, broad-shouldered, quiet. I did not smile much. Men tested me. The first time I drew a gun on another man was in a dusty street outside Fort Belknap. He was drunk, waving his pistol around, saying ugly things to a woman who could not leave. I told him to put it down. He laughed and raised it. I fired before he finished the motion. He lived, but he never used that hand right again. Word spread with each year. The space inside me where fear lived grew more familiar. I mistook that familiarity for control. By the early 1860s, I was known in places where names traveled faster than faces. The Civil War came and went around us like a storm that never quite touched the ground where I stood, but it changed the land all the same. Texas filled with men who had learned to kill and did not know what to do with that knowledge. Towns sprang up and rotted just as fast. Law was a thin thing, stretched over wide spaces. Men like me found work in that stretch. Sometimes we were hired to protect. Sometimes to end problems others could not. Each time I told myself it was just a job, just another day survived. I told myself I was different from the men who enjoyed it. I told myself I was careful, restrained. That story helped me sleep. but restraint does not erase consequence. The time I stood over a body, each time I watched a life leave a man's eyes, something inside me went quiet again, the same way my mother had gone quiet years before. I did not recognize it then. I only knew that I felt less afterward, and that scared me more than a danger ever had in 1873, the year most people remember me for. I was 57 years old, though I looked younger then. Fear keeps a man sharp. That year, Texas felt especially restless. Cattle money, rail money, old grudges, new weapons. I had already buried more men than I cared to count, though I tried not to think of them as buried. Thinking of them that way made them real. Instead, I thought of them as moments past, roads taken or not taken. That was easier. The incident that made me feared began small, as these things always do. A ranter hired me to escort a payroll north. 3 men riding light with a strong box were ambushed outside Abilene by a gang that had been trailing us since the Brazos. They thought they had us boxed in along a dry wash. I remember the heat more than anything, the way the air pressed down, the dust sticking to sweat. I remember thinking how quiet it was just before it wasn't. When it was over, 4 men lay dead and 2 were wounded. None of them were mine. The story that spread afterward grew teeth. By the time it reached San Antonio, I was said to have smiled while I shot, said to have spoken words I never said to have enjoyed it. Fear likes to decorate itself. From then on, men crossed the street when they saw me. Some tipped their hats, some spat. I was hired more often and trusted less. Women looked at me like I was already gone. I cannot say I blamed them. There was a distance in me by then that I could feel, even if I could not name it. I slept lightly, woke ready. I kept my back to walls. I counted exits. I lived like the night might always come crashing through the door. There was one man I killed that I remember more clearly than the others. His name was Thomas Reed. He was young, barely 30, with a wife back east and a temper he could not control. He challenged me in a saloon in Waco, said he wanted to see if the stories were true. I told him to sit down. He did not. When it was over, he lay on the floor bleeding, and I stood there holding the thing everyone said made me who I was. I remember looking at his face and thinking of my father's hands, of my mother's quiet. I remember feeling tired in a way. Sleep does not fix. That was around the time my hand started to shake. Not enough for anyone else to see, but I felt it, a small tremor, like something inside me was trying to escape. I drank to quiet it. I worked to outrun it. Neither helped for long. I told myself this was just the price of staying alive in a hard world. Men like me always have reasons ready. I left Texas not long after, drifting west again, then north. The fear followed me for a while, then faded as newer, louder men took its place. I was grateful for that. I was also empty. When the thing you have built yourself around falls away, you find out how little else there is. I took a job guarding a stage route in New Mexico, then another as a ranch hand where no one knew my history. I grew older. My hair went gray. My eyes did not change. They stayed watchful, even when there was nothing left to watch for. I thought distance would loosen the past's grip. It did not. It only gave me space to hear myself think, and that was sometimes worse. At night, I would replay moments I had buried, not the fights but the seconds before them, the chance I might have turned away. I realized then that survival and living are not the same thing. No one had ever explained that to me. I had assumed they were equal. It was not one single moment that taught me what I had learned too late. It was a collection of small ones. A. Which I were looking at me without fear because he did not know who I had been. A woman offering me coffee without asking questions. A night spent alone by a fire, realizing I could set the gun down and nothing bad would happen. These moments felt strange, almost dangerous in their calm. I did not trust them at first. Colm had never kept me alive before I married once. Late, her name was Ellen. She had lost a husband to fever and did not flinch at the shadows in me. We met on a small spread outside Santa Fe where I had taken work fixing fence. She watched me a long time before speaking, as if deciding whether I was safe. When she finally did, it was about nothing important. Whether coffee to sound the wind made at night. That was how she was. Gentle without being weak. We did not speak much about the past. We did not need to. She would touch my hand when it shook. Not to stop it, just to be there. With Ellen, I learned something I had never known, what it felt like to sit with another person without scanning the room. The habit never fully left me, but it softened. We grew old together in small ways, counting seasons instead of bodies. I worked the land. I slept through nights without waking. For a time I believed I had finally outrun who I used to be. She died before me, as most people do when a man lives this long. Fever took her slow. I sat with her at the end and told her things I had never told anyone else. I told her about my mother, about the night I ran, about the men whose faces stayed with me. She listened the way good people do, without trying to fix what cannot be fixed. When she was gone, the quiet returned, but it was different now. It did not feel like punishment. It felt like a space left open. Now I am an old man sitting in a small room with light, coming through a window that looks out on nothing much at all. The gun is gone. I gave it away years ago to a boy who needed protection more than power. I still wake sometimes with my heart racing, expecting boots on a floor that does not exist anymore. I have learned that fear, once it makes a home in you, does not leave just because the danger does. I spent decades thinking I was running toward freedom, toward strength, toward something I could control. What I was really doing was running away from a boy who learned too early that the world could take everything and never apologize. I became feared because fear was the language I knew best. It spoke for me when I did not know how to speak for myself. If there is one truth I can offer, it is not a lesson, just an observation from a man who has lived a long time. Becoming fear did not make me safe, it only made me alone. The strength that kept me alive also kept me distant, and it took the better part of a lifetime to understand the difference. I do not regret surviving. I regret how long it took me to believe I deserved more than that. I am telling you this now because I do not have many years left, and because stories like mine are usually told wrong. They turn men into legends and forget the cost. They forget the quiet that follows, the empty rooms, the hands that shake when no one is looking. I want you to know the truth as I know it, not dressed up, not sharpened for effect. Just a life, lived hard, understood late. When I close my eyes now, I no longer see the men I killed. I see my mother's face the last morning. I saw her. I see Ellen standing in a doorway, waiting for me to come inside. I see a boy running through the dark, not toward danger, but away from pain, doing the best he can with what he knows. I finally understand him, and that, at the end of all this, is enough for me to rest. I thought that understanding would be the end of it, that once I finally named what I had been doing all those years, the rest would fall quiet and let me be. That was another thing I learned late. Understanding does not erase a life. It only lets you look at it without flinching as much. After Ellen passed, the days stretched in a way they never had before. When you share time with someone, it has edge. Morning has a purpose. Evening has weight. Alone, the hours loosen and wander. I stayed on the land for a while because it was familiar and because the work still needed doing, whether I felt like doing it or not. Fences still fell. Animals still needed water. The earth does not care who you used to be. People came and went. Some knew my name from stories they had heard, usually wrong. Some knew nothing at all. I preferred the ones who knew nothing. They talked to me like I was just another old man with a stiff back and steady habits. I learned that anonymity can be a kind of mercy. There were moments when the past tried to reassert itself. A young man once recognized me in a town outside Las Vegas, New Mexico. He stared too long, then asked if I was who he thought I was. I told him no. He looked disappointed, as if he had wanted the story to be true more than he wanted the truth. That stayed with me. I realized then how much people want violence to mean something grand, something clean. They do not like to hear that. It mostly means paperwork, waiting, and regret that arrives late and stays forever. My body began to fail me in ordinary ways. My knees went first. Then my eyesight softened around the edges. The shaking in my hands worsened some days and eased on others, like weather I could not predict. I accepted it the way I had accepted everything else, without complaint, because complaint had never changed much in my life. What changed was my patience. I grew slower, not just in movement but in judgment. That slowness brought clarity I had never allowed myself before. I began to remember things I had pushed down. Not the violence, but the small kindnesses I had ignored because they did not fit the man I thought I needed to be. A woman who slipped me bread when I was starving on the road west. A Mexican vaquero who showed me how to ride better and never asked where I came from. A sheriff who let me walk away from a fight I did not start, choosing not to make a name for himself at my expense. These moments mattered. I had treated them like exceptions. They were not. They were the rule I refused to see. One winter, harsher than most, I fell ill. Fever took me hard, and for several days I drifted in and out of consciousness. In that space between waking and sleep, I did not see gunfights or blood. I saw fields, cotton rows, my mother's hands washing clothes in cold water. I heard her humming a sound so soft it barely existed. When I woke fully, I understood something that surprised me. I was not afraid to die. I was afraid of being forgotten in the wrong way. Surviving that illness felt like a decision had been made without consulting me. I took it as a sign that there was still something left to do, though I did not know what. I sold the land not long after and moved closer to town, into a small place where people checked on one another out of habit. I sat on a bench most mornings and watched the day begin. I learned names. I learned which dogs belonged to which children. It was a quiet life. It was the first life I had ever chosen. Sometimes people asked me about the old days, about Texas, about guns. I answered plainly. When I answered at all, no embellishment, no correction of legends unless they pressed me. Most lost interest quickly. The truth is not as exciting as a story. I was fine with that. I had lived with excitement long enough. There was one afternoon, not many years ago, when a boy sat beside me on that bench. He was maybe 10, skinny, restless. He He asked why my hands shook. I told him the truth, that I had lived a long time and done hard things. He nodded like that. Made sense. After a while he asked if I was scared when I was young. I told him yes. He thought about that and said he was scared too sometimes. I did not tell him what to do about it. I just sat there with him until his mother came to get him. When they left, I realized my hands had been steady the whole time. I had believed being alone was safer. It was not. It was just quieter as I sit here now, the light thinner than it used to be. I do not think about legacy the way men in stories do. I do not care if my name survives. Names are light things. What matters is that somewhere along the line, the chain broke. That a boy born, owned, lived long enough to sit in peace. That the fear did not win everything. I know that it only teaches you where the turning points were. Mine came late, but they came when the end comes, and I feel it will not be long now. I hope it comes quietly. The weight of a cup in my hand, a voice saying my name without fear in it. I have spent enough years listening for danger. I am ready to listen for nothing at all. If you remember anything from what I have told you, let it be this simple thing. I carried fear across half a continent. I set it down here, at the very end. That is all I have left to tell. There are days now when memory comes apart. A name I should know takes a moment longer to arrive. A year loses its place. I used to fight that, grip tight and force things back into order. I do not anymore. I let the mind wander where it wants. It becomes a room you can walk around and you find corners you forgot existed. And I spend a lot of my time there now, standing in places I once rushed through. I think about choices that did not feel like choices at the time. I think about how often survival pretends to be destiny. There is one memory that returns often, gentle but insistent. It is from shortly after I escaped, when I was still half wild with fear. I had been hiding near a creek, living on whatever I could find. One evening, an old Choctaw man sat across the water from me. He had seen me days earlier. He knew I was there. He did not call out or threaten me, he just sat and smoked. After a while he pushed a piece of dried meat across the water with a stick and left. We never spoke. That moment did not save my life, but it changed its direction. I did not know that then. I know it now. I used to think my life turned on gunfights and escapes, on moments when the world narrowed to a single decision. Those moments make noise so they feel important. But when I look back honestly, the quiet gestures mattered more. The times someone chose not to hurt me when they could have. The times I chose not to pull the trigger even though it would have been easier. Those moments did not build my reputation, but they built what little peace I have now. People sometimes ask if I regret becoming what I became. That question is harder than it sounds. Regret implies there was a clear other path, well lit and waiting. I did not see one at the time. I saw a series of doors, all heavy, all dangerous, and I chose the one that stayed closed the longest. I regret the harm. Yes, I regret the fear I put into others. But I do not regret the boy who did what he knew to do in order to live. He deserved understanding too. As my strength fades, I find myself less interested in explanation. The world will keep turning whether it understands me or not. That used to bother me, it does not anymore. There is relief in knowing you do not have to be fully known to be complete. A life does not need an audience to be real. Some nights, when sleep will not come, I talk quietly to people who are gone, not because I believe they can hear me, but because speaking their names keeps them from vanishing entirely. I talk to my mother most of all. I tell her I made it farther than I ever thought I would. I tell her I found kindness in places I did not expect. I tell her I am not afraid the way I used to be. If there is an answer, it comes as calm, settling over me like a blanket. I can feel the end approaching in the way old animals do. There is no panic in it, just a loosening. The body gives signals if you are willing to listen. I rest more. I eat less. The world feels slightly farther away, as if I am already stepping back from it. That is all right. I have stepped back from worse. What surprises me most is gratitude. Not for the violence, not for the suffering, but for the simple. The fact of having seen so much of the world change. I have watched railroads cut through open land. I have watched towns rise where nothing stood before. I have watched children grow into people who will never know the fear I knew as a boy, and that feels like progress. However small, if this is the last thing I leave behind, I want it to be plain. A man can be shaped by terrible things and still find gentleness at the end. Fear can keep you alive, but it cannot teach you how to live. That lesson came late to me, but it came. I am tired now in a good way. The kind that comes after honest work, not running. If my voice fades before I finish this thought, let it stand unfinished. Not everything needs a clean ending. Some lives simply taper off, like a long road easing into grass. I was many things in my time. A slave, a runaway, a hired gun, a husband, an old man on a bench. None of those alone explain me. Together, they're enough. There is something else I have not said yet, and I think that is because I was not ready to say it until now. Old age does not just take strength from the body, it strips excuses from the mind. You stop protecting the stories you told yourself because there is no one left to impress, not even you. I used to believe my life was shaped by violence because violence was what people remembered. But when I sit with it honestly, violence was only the echo. The real sound came earlier, in small rooms, in nights when no one came to help, in learning that pain could arrive without reason. That was where the shape was set. Everything after was just me tracing those lines again and again, thinking repetition would turn them into something else. There was a stretch of years after Ellen died and before I fell ill, when I was angry, in a quiet way, not the loud anger of youth, but a settled bitterness that did not announce itself. I was angry that I had survived when better men had not. Angry that my hand still shook while men who had done worse slept peacefully. Angry that understanding came so late, it felt almost cruel. I did not show this to anyone. It lived inside me like a second spine, stiff and unyielding. What loosened it was something small, almost foolish. A neighbor's mule broke through my fence one afternoon. The boy who owned it came running, breathless, apologizing over and over like he expected punishment. I could see it in his eyes, that old familiar fear, the kind that waits for pain. Without thinking, I put a hand on his shoulder and told him it was all right, that fences break and mules wander and none of it was worth fear. His whole body changed. When I said that, shoulders dropped, breath slowed. After he left, I sat down and cried, not loud, not long, but real. I realized then how rarely I had offered mercy simply because I could. That was when I understood another thing too. Fear is not only something done to you, it is something you pass on if you are not careful. I had carried it from my childhood into other men's lives, into rooms and streets and stories that outlived the moment. I did not intend that. Intention does not matter as much as people like to believe. What matters is what remains after you leave. Once I saw that, I became gentler without trying to be. Not soft, just careful. I chose words the way I once chose routes, through dangerous country. I paid attention to how people reacted when I entered a space. I learned when to sit, when to stand, when to speak, when silence was the kind of thing. These choices did not erase the past, but they changed the weight of the present. Near the end, life narrows again, the way it does at the beginning. Big ambitions fall away. You return to basics. Light through a window, warmth in your hands, the sound of someone moving in the next room. I have come to like that narrowing. It feels honest. There is no room left for pretending. If I am being truthful, I am still afraid sometimes. Not of men or guns or death. I am afraid of being reduced to a single story, a single label. Afraid that the boy who ran barefoot through the dark will be swallowed by the man people feared. That is why I kept talking. That is why I am still talking now. I want you to know that a life can hold contradictions without breaking. A man can cause harm and still long for gentleness. A man can survive cruelty and still crave kindness more than victory. These things can live in the same body. They lived in mine. When I am gone, there will be no marker that tells the whole truth. Maybe just a name and a date, if that. That is enough. The rest lives in moments like this, passed quietly from one person to another, not to warn or instruct, but to be understood. I am not proud of everything I did. I am not ashamed of surviving. I am simply here, at the end of a long road, finally able to look back without turning away. If you are listening to this somewhere, far from where I sit, know that you have kept me company longer than most. That matters more than you might think. An old man does not need much. A steady voice, a willing ear, a little time. Now my voice is tiring, and the light is fading the way it does each evening, slow and patient. I will stop here, not because there is nothing left, but because this is a good place to rest.